Most people think omega-3 only lives in salmon and fish oil capsules, but it doesn't. There's over a dozen every plant sitting in your kitchen, your garden, even growing wild along the sidewalk that carry the same essential fats. One of them is a weed most people rip out and throw away. Another is a bright yellow field flower you've probably driven past 100 times without knowing its secret. Let's get into it. Before we go through the list, you need to understand what omega-3 actually is and why it matters. Omega-3 is an essential fat, which means your body cannot make it on its own. You have to get it from food, and it plays a real role in heart health, brain function, and calming down chronic inflammation. Now here's the distinction that matters. There are two main types, EPA and DHA, which come from fish and are used by your body directly, and ALA, or alpha-linolenic acid, which is a type found in plants. Your body can use ALA on its own, but it only converts a small percentage of it into APA and DHA, somewhere in the low single digits for most people. So think of these plants as a valuable part of the balanced diet, not a direct replacement for fish or for anything a doctor has recommended. And if you're on blood thinners like warfarin or aspirin, it's worth mentioning omega-3 intake to your doctor, since high amounts can affect how your blood clots. With that out of the way, let's look at where ALA is actually hiding, starting with the plants that are probably already sitting in your kitchen. Kale is one of the oldest cultivated greens in human history, feeding people across Europe for more than 2,000 years, long before the common head cabbage even existed. It's mostly known today for its vitamins and fiber. What most people miss is that a single cup of cooked kale also contains a small but real amount of ALA. On its own, that's not going to move the needle much, but kale is a kind of food people eat consistently, week after week, and small consistent amounts of anything tend to matter more over time than a single impressive dose you only get once. It also happens to grow sweeter after a hard frost, which is part of why it was such a reliable winter crop for so long. Then there's Brussels sprouts. These little cabbages carry a surprising amount of omega-3 for a common vegetable, somewhere around 170 milligrams per 100 gram serving. That may sound small next to flaxseed, but here's the thing. You eat vegetables by the cup, not by the tablespoon, so it adds up over the course of a meal. And the way you cook them changes a lot. Boil them and you get a soft, sulfurous vegetable that gave Brussels sprouts their bad reputation in the first place. Roast them instead until the outer leaves crisp up and caramelize, and you get both better flavor and better retained nutrition. And then there's avocado. On its own, avocado is not mature omega-3 source, so don't expect it to compete with flaxseed or chia, but it earns its place on this list for a different reason. Omega-3 and several other nutrients in these plants are fat-soluble, which means your body needs dietary fat around to absorb them properly. The healthy monounsaturated fat in avocado does exactly the job. So pairing a purslane salad with a few slices of avocado isn't just a good flavor, it's a small, practical way to get more out of everything else you're eating. Quick question for you. Out of these three, which one is already a regular in your kitchen? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious which one surprised you. Now, let's move to the most concentrated source of plant omega-3 there is, seeds. Flax seeds is the richest plant source of omega-3 we know of. 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed delivers around 2 grams of ALA, which is more than most people get from the entire day of eating. But here's the catch, and it's an important one. The seed has to be ground. Whole flax seed has a tough outer coat, tough enough that it often passes straight through your digestive system undigested, taking all that omega-3 with it on the way out. So, buy it whole if you want, but grind it fresh in a small coffee grinder before you use it, and keep it in the fridge in a sealed container. Those oils are fragile, and they turn rancid quickly once they're exposed to air, light, and heat. Chia seeds work a little differently, and they come with an advantage flaxseed doesn't have. Just 1 ounce, about 2 tablespoons, deliver over 5 grams of ALA, making chia one of the most concentrated sources of this entire list. Hemp seeds get a reputation they don't deserve. Hemp hurts, the kind sold as food, will not affect your mind in any way. That's a completely different part of the plant. What hemp seeds will actually do is give you a well-balanced dose of healthy fat. 3 tablespoons provides roughly 3 grams of ALA, along with complete plant protein, meaning it contains all the essential amino acids your body can make on its own, plus a solid amount of magnesium. What makes hemp genuinely unusual is its ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fats. Most modern diets lean heavily toward omega-6, and too much omega-6 relative to omega-3 is linked to more inflammation in the body. Hemp's ratio is close to what researchers consider ideal, and that balance is rare to find in a single plant food. And then there's sacha inchi, a star-shaped seed that grows on a climbing vine deep in the Amazon rainforest. It's exceptionally high in ALA, and a single serving can deliver close to 3 times the omega-3 you get from the same amount of walnuts. When roasted, it tastes something like a cross between a peanut and an almond. It also comes with a good amount of plant protein and vitamin E, and that vitamin E isn't incidental. It acts as a natural antioxidant that helps protect those fragile omega-3 oils from breaking down. Sacha inchi has been cultivated in Peru for generations, and it's only in the last several years that it's showing up on shelves outside of South America. Beyond eating seeds directly, some of the best sources of omega-3 come from oil. The oil pressed from seeds is rich in ALA, often somewhere between 35 and 45%. What made it especially valuable to farmers who had no way to refrigerate anything is that it's remarkably stable. Most omega-3 rich oils oxidize quickly and go rancid. That's exactly why sustainable farmers, drawn to a crop that thrives in poor soil with very little water, are bringing it back today. Canola oil comes from that bright yellow field you've probably driven past 100 times without second thought. It's a member of the same family as cabbage and Brussels sprouts, and was developed from an older plant called rapeseed by Canadian breeders back in the 1970s. Its oil is one of the most affordable, accessible sources of omega-3 you are likely to find in an ordinary kitchen. 1 tablespoon delivers over a gram of ALA. Because the flavor is so mild, it slips into everyday cooking almost completely unnoticed, which is part of why it's easy to overlook as a meaningful omega-3 source. If you can, go with a cold-pressed version and try not to overheat it during cooking, since high heat damages the delicate fats. And then there's perilla, sometimes called shiso, an herb in the mint family that's been a staple in Korean, Japanese, and Chinese cooking for centuries, but is still largely unknown in most American kitchens. In Korea, the broad leaves are used to wrap grilled meat, and the roasted seeds are ground into rich, savory sauces. But it's the oil pressed from perilla seeds that stands out here. It contains one of the highest concentrations of ALA of any plant oil ever studied, often somewhere between 54 and 64%. And that puts it right alongside flax and chia at the very top of the entire plant kingdom. It just never made a jump across the ocean into Western gardens the way it pressed across Asia. This last group is where things get genuinely straight in a good way. Purslane is a low, sprawling, succulent weed with fleshy, powder-shaped leaves that most gardeners pull out and throw away without a second thought. Here's what they are missing. Purslane contains more omega-3 than any other leafy green ever measured, roughly 5 times more than spinach, gram for gram, and is one of the only land plants on Earth that also contains trace amounts of the marine type omega-3s, the kind usually found only in fish and algae, not in anything growing in soil. It has a crisp texture and slightly lemony bite, and it works well raw in salad, which is one of the easiest ways to preserve those delicate fats. One caution worth mentioning: purslane naturally contains oxalates, so if you have a history of kidney stones, it's worth eating in moderation rather than in large amounts. And if you're foraging it yourself rather than buying it, always be certain of your plant identification before eating any growing wild. Achium is a white flower with streaking blue and purple flowers that most gardeners have never even heard of. Despite its growing across parts of Europe for centuries, its seed oil contains a less common form of omega-3, and early research suggests the body may be able to convert this particular form more readily than the ALA found in most other plants on this list. For a long time, it was seen as nothing more than a pretty roadside weed that honeybees happen to love. Only in recent years have researchers started paying closer attention to what's actually in its soil. And finally, chlorella and spirulina. These are microscopic algae, far too small to see with the naked eye individually, sold as deep green powders. They matter here for a specific reason that ties this whole list together. Fish don't actually make their own omega-3. They get it by eating algae, which sits at the very bottom of the marine food chain. So, chlorella and spirulina give you a way to get that same marine type omega-3 directly from the source, without the fish in between. If you want to try them, stick to a tested, reputable brand, since algae naturally absorb whatever is present in the water they'll grow in, good or bad. So here's the real takeaway. Omega-3 is not something locked away in fish alone. It's in the weeds growing between your garden rows, in the seeds your grandparents may have kept in the pantry, in an ordinary field of yellow flowers, and in algae drifting at the bottom of the sea. None of this replaces a conversation with your doctor, especially if you're on blood thinners, since high omega-3 intake that interact with those medications. But as part of a varied, balanced diet, these plants are worth a second look. If this changed the way you think about where your omega-3 comes from, hit like, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know in the comments which one of these surprised you the most.